Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons. And today we're going to be talking about the 24th year of Dungeons & Dragons history, 1997. We're going to talk about 1997 through the filter of clear, catalysts, location, entity, artifact, relationship. All right. Now, who is the catalyst for Dungeons & Dragons in 1997? All right, well, I'm not going to bury the lead here. This gentleman's name is Peter Adkison, and he is incredibly important to Dungeons & Dragons. So as far as the overall history of Dungeons & Dragons, I actually think that Peter Adkison is the second most important person to ever impact Dungeons & Dragons. And that's a huge statement, and I'm going to back it up. Now, of course, the first person who is absolutely integral to Dungeons & Dragons is Gary Gygax. I don't think there's ever going to be any argument that no one did more to make Dungeons & Dragons a reality and to bring Dungeons & Dragons to the world than Gary Gygax. And I'm not sure that there will ever be. I'm not sure it's possible to surpass his importance to the history of Dungeons & Dragons. He's the creator. Without him, nothing happens. I'm completely convinced of that. Dungeons & Dragons is not a reality without Gary Gygax, right? But in the history of Dungeons & Dragons, 1997 is a hinge. It's a hinge. The history of Dungeons & Dragons turns in 1997, and it's a forking path, so that the things that happen now, going forward from 1997 to 2019, they all really have to do with Peter Adkison, right? And so let's talk about who he was and what he did, because what he did was incredibly important in the history of Dungeons & Dragons. So Peter Adkison is the CEO of Wizards of the Coast. This is 1997. His company is only 4 years old. It was created in 1993. Actually, yeah, in 1993, Wizards of the Coast, WotC might have been a little older than that. I don't think it was. I think it was one of their first products out of the gate. But in 1993, Wizards of the Coast purchases Magic the Gathering from Richard Garfield and uses Richard Garfield's model and his game design genius to build Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering will become the most successful tabletop game to ever be created in any genre, not in tabletop role-playing games, not in board games, none of it, right? It's possible that maybe a few games like Monopoly have outsold Magic the Gathering, but I'm not sure that's the case, right? So, but it will certainly become the most successful collectible tabletop game, right? And it really and what Magic the Gathering did was it really created an entirely new genre, which was collectible card games. And it changes, people had people had collected baseball cards, and people had collected board games, and people had collected RPGs. And so here in 1993, Magic the Gathering really changes the game completely and creates really what is virtually the most perfect commercial product ever to be created in tabletop gaming, period, end of sentence. Now, if you think I'm wrong, listen to what Peter Adkison does, all right? So Richard Garfield is an absolute genius for creating Magic the Gathering. It's a really unique design, okay? But world-changing designs are not enough, okay? In that he had a multi-billion dollar idea, and I'm pretty sure that a few billion have been made. I would say, I would not be surprised. That's, we don't have the numbers for that. I don't know if Magic is billions. It's certainly hundreds of millions, right? And it may be a multi-billion dollar product, right? But again, those numbers get it's hard to get numbers from the tabletop role-playing game industry. But here's the thing. Here's what we do know, right? So Peter Adkison, he owns Wizards of the Coast, right? And there is just Magic the Gathering has opened up a fire hose of money, and there is just money spraying everywhere. Like, it is so much money coming in. It's literally millions and millions and millions of dollars, and every time they print a release, it just sells out, and they're just ratcheting back, the printer level, saying print higher numbers for the next set. It's incredible, right? Now, Now, the success of Magic the Gathering that comes from the design work of Richard Garfield. But the genius of Peter Adkison absolutely cannot be ignored, right? So Peter Adkison sees this spray of money coming out, and he comes along and he says, okay, let's be smart. Let's put some of this away. Let's build the company of Wizards of the Coast, right? You don't need another product. You don't need anything else with Magic the Gathering, all right? But the reality is, Peter Adkison was smart to say, no, we're planning for a rainy day. I want to have a robust, strong business, and I want to be a competent, capable, cautious business person, right? And that's what he does, right? He starts stocking away those millions, right? And not just spending it on yachts and like silly stuff, but he is investing in Wizards of the Coast. In 1994, with just 4 years of profit, 4 years of profit from Magic the Gathering, Peter Adkison takes Wizards of the Coast, the company that owns Magic the Gathering, and purchases TSR lock, stock, and barrel, and gets Dungeons & Dragons. Peter Adkison, with 4 years of profit from Magic the Gathering, purchases Dungeons & Dragons outright. Just like, I'll take that, boom, done. Okay? It is an incredible accomplishment. It's hard to even explain how important this is in the history of Dungeons & Dragons. It's a hinge, right? And being owned by Wizards of the Coast will absolutely, fundamentally change the future of Dungeons & Dragons. Now, here's the thing. What was happening with the business of Dungeons & Dragons before Wizards of the Coast, right? Well, what was really happening with this is my take on looking at the history of what happened with Dungeons & Dragons. I think Dungeons & Dragons started with Gary Gygax and his friends, and they were smart business people, but their first and foremost, they were gamers. And I think they were gamers before they were business people, right? Like, they cared for business, and they wanted to do good business, and they wanted to be good at business, but their burning passion was for gaming, right? And the reality is, what happened with Dungeons & Dragons is there was an explosion of success between 1974, and between 1997. And really, right around, I would say, 1989, the world just started to change so fast that the TSR people just couldn't respond in time. They could not change the direction of the company, right? So in 1989, really what's starting to happen is the world is changing. Technology is changing the world forever. And one of the biggest things that happens right out of the gate is there's a movement toward video games, right? And video games make it very hard for Dungeons & Dragons, as literally millions of players are going, I can't make it this weekend, Atari. I can't make it this weekend in television. I can't make it this weekend, Nintendo. I can't make it this weekend, PlayStation. You know, like, it is changing the world, and it's making it hard. That had really dealt a body blow to Dungeons & Dragons. And then Magic the Gathering comes on and just steals so many Dungeons & Dragons players, DMs, and really even gets some of the attention of some Dungeons & Dragons designers. And it's just a 1-2 punch, right? It's video games and then CCGs. And honestly, TSR just did not see it coming and really had no ability to tack and deal with the problem, right? Or they just didn't have a strong ability to do with it. And so Peter Adkison, with 4 years of profit of Magic the Gathering, buys Dungeons & Dragons like a trinket. Like, it's incredible. Like, this is an incredible accomplishment. And Peter Adkison is a ridiculously powerful part of Dungeons & Dragons history. I really think he's the second most important person in all of Dungeons & Dragons history, right? All right, so what is our location in 1997 for Dungeons & Dragons? Well, it is Princeton, New Jersey, all right? Now, what's in Princeton, New Jersey? Princeton University, right? And what's in Princeton University? Well, in Princeton University is the Hypnerotomachia, all right? Now, the Hypnerotomachia, Princeton actually has the real copy, a real printed copy. No, not even a copy. It's like the original. Like, this is the publication of the Hypnerotomachia. The Hypnerotomachia is like a 400 or 500 year old mystery volume, right? It is surrounded in mystery. It is told in different stories. It's coded, right? And there's only a question of how deeply it's coded, right? And the Hypnerotomachia is absolutely surrounded in mystery. Nobody understands fully its full origin, and nobody understands what the story is contained in Hypnerotomachia. But it's an incredibly valuable book. In fact, the idea of what is its dollar sign, well, you can put $NA, because it's considered to be so special and so unique that it's not really for sale to anyone or from anyone. It's just an incredibly important physical book, right? Now, the Hypnerotomachia, there have been books written about this book. Many, many, many books. I would highly suggest to you The Rule of Four, right? The Hypnerotomachia is an incredibly important book. It's kept at Princeton University. And one of the reasons why we're talking about it there is Princeton University has a library where special books are very carefully preserved, right? And one of the reasons why this is important is fundamentally here in 1997, with video games absolutely clawing over the gates to get at Dungeons & Dragons' throat, right? With technology fundamentally changing the world, and with people very seriously starting to declare that that print is dead. You're hearing this a lot in 1997, and even today, when we look around, it really looks like people are printing things. Why are people printing things, right? And the answer is there's really no strong sound reason, right? But the Hypnerotomachia is this incredibly important book, and that Princeton carefully preserves, right? And it points to us to Dungeons & Dragons, saying, you know what, Dungeons & Dragons is on the rope. It had to be essentially rescued by Peter Adkison, purchasing it outright and then delivering a sound, good business model for Dungeons & Dragons. Not just a sound, good set of rules, but a sound business model. The idea that Dungeons & Dragons needed good sound business, a good sound business plan as much as it needed a good sound rule system was important, and Peter Adkison recognized that and delivered it, right? But first and foremost, Dungeons & Dragons is a print product, right? It was a print product in 1974. It was a print product on 5th edition when it was brought out in 2014, 84, 94, 2004, 2014, 40 years later, right? So it's really super important to understand that Dungeons & Dragons is a print product, and that is incredibly important and has to be recognized. It cannot be forgotten. And the Hypnerotomachia, kept at Princeton University, and Princeton University itself and Princeton, New Jersey, are statements to people that, hey, we understand the value of every volume, every single volume. Every volume is important, and we're going, and print is important, like it was centuries ago and it is today, right? Who is the entity for 1997? The entity for 1997 is Tiger Woods. So Tiger Woods, he has African American and Asian heritage, but he absolutely is dominating golf at this point, and really beginning. He is setting his mark as one of the greatest golfers to ever walk the planet. And because he does not fit the traditional profile of a golfer, and yet he is defeating every golfer that stands next to him, he is pointing the way for the world and for Dungeons & Dragons designers, dungeon masters, and players, saying that it is important, diversity is important, that every hobby, every pursuit in American life, we need to make sure that prejudice is no longer part of that history. And the reason why is, Tiger Woods is showing every human being has the possibility of being great at every single thing, even if traditionally people that have the attributes of that person don't normally perform or participate in that activity. And so Tiger Woods is a gigantic arrow pointing at diversity for the world and for Dungeons and Dragons, right? What is our artifact for 1997? Our artifact for 1997 is Rampage World Tour, and that is a arcade box, right? And actually an arcade machine. And actually at this point, right, Rampage World Tour is one of the very last of the arcade machines that will go into arcades that are kept open because they need to be kept open, right? Arcades were a huge part of the 80s and 90s, and today they're absolutely relics. They're just like, they're almost like a, they're just antiquities, right? They're kept around. There's still some arcades today, but they're really kept as kind of like, they're novelties. That's the best way to say it. They're novelties. And the reality is, there are, Rampage World Tour arcade machine is a relic, and it's our artifact for 1997 because the door is being closed on traditional arcades because there will be an arcade in the house in every American's home, and it will be a Nintendo arcade, or it'll be a PlayStation arcade, or it'll be a personal computer. We are moving arcades into our homes and shutting down traditional community arcades, right? You would find in a strip mall or at a regular mall, right? What is the relationship for Dungeons & Dragons in 1997? The relationship Dungeons & Dragons has in 1997 is to therapy. In 1997, you will be hearing the beginnings of people talking about playing Dungeons & Dragons as therapy to help them manage mental health issues, right? Now, there's a few different ways that Dungeons & Dragons is actually used in therapy. One way is it's officially used in therapy. There are therapists who have used Dungeons & Dragons in the past. Not Dungeons & Dragons specifically, I think, but role-playing games to draw out people who need assistance with mental health issues, right? This is very rare. It's very rare that it's used in official capacity. It's probably been done only a few times, right? But unofficially, people will absolutely use therapy, use Dungeons & Dragons as self-care, even to the level of therapy. And I have a friend myself who's like, D&D is my therapy, right? It helps me check myself, level out. It helps me to deal with, things that are inside of me that I want to level, right? And one of the things, and I thought, I looked at him kind of sideways because I don't use Dungeons & Dragons as therapy, but since then, I've heard of many, many well-respected people who are connected to Dungeons & Dragons and connected to the tabletop role-playing game industry, like Brian Macklin and Satine Phoenix, who have talked about the importance of mental health and recognizing the importance of mental health for Dungeons & Dragons designers, Dungeons & Dragons dungeon masters, Dungeons & Dragons players, right? And so the levels of therapy are a few times Dungeons & Dragons and tabletop role-playing games have actually been used by psychologists and psychiatrists as a tool. Not the only tool, but as a tool. It's very rare, but it has happened, right? And then unofficially, many, many players will use Dungeons & Dragons to almost to give them to apply it as therapy to themselves, which is very unofficial and might even be not the best idea, but it is happening at this point. And then last, because Dungeons & Dragons is the type of game where you sit and you're sitting next to somebody for weeks or months telling a story together. If somebody has a mental health issue, some players are saying, "Hey, I'm recognizing that you're in pain. Let me give you my recommendation for my therapist," right? And so it's also, because people actually play with each other, and there is a structure of, we're going to sit down at this table together, and I'm going to see you every week. Dungeons & Dragons players are pointing each other to therapy. So Dungeons & Dragons in 1997 will have a relationship with therapy, and that relationship will continue to this day, right? That is a clear history of Dungeons & Dragons, Dungeons & Dragons year, 24th year, 1997. And please let me know your thoughts on Dungeons & Dragons in 1997. Let me know your thoughts on the huge event of Wizards of the Coast buying Dungeons & Dragons. Do you think that was good? Do you think that was bad? What's your thoughts on that? And then also, please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful day.